Great. Okay, welcome, Dr. Heather, to the Biohacker Babes. Thank you so much for joining us today on this Monday.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're very excited to talk about thyroid health, particularly Hashimoto's today. So, we have some commonalities. I think we all landed here because conventional medicine was not providing all of the answers. It provides some answers, but we're all aligned that we really do need, for optimal health, we have to take a functional approach. We have to look upstream, we have to look at root causes. And I think that particularly goes for thyroid health. There's so much that we tend to be missing. So a lot of women are just not given the proper help, for lack of a better word, when it comes to thyroid symptoms and challenges. So we're so excited to have you be the expert on Hashimoto's today. I'm curious, just to kick it off, what do you feel like, if you could maybe share like the top three things, what are the top three things that doctors are getting wrong in terms of conventional medicine when we're looking at thyroid?
Well, I think if we kind of, take a step back, most of the time we go into the doctor's office and we have these classic low thyroid symptoms. Like we have, our hair's falling out, we're tired, we can't sleep, anxiety, depression, we can't lose weight. We go in and they check our thyroid and they say, okay, you have low thyroid. Here's your thyroid medication and you should feel better. And so, we take the medication and maybe some of us feel a little bit better for a short period of time, but usually that isn't going to fix all the underlying issues, and the symptoms really still stay there. And we keep going back and asking, is there another dosage? Is there another pill? Is there another thing to help these symptoms? And I think at the end of the day, because we're only looking very myopically at the thyroid and not looking at the whole body and how the body all functions together, that really gets us in trouble. And once we have been diagnosed with low thyroid, all the symptoms that we get are like, oh, well, what do you expect? You have low thyroid. And then they're trying to treat the thyroid with thyroid hormones and thyroid medication alone. And the thyroid and the body are much more complex than that. And so, we get boxed into low thyroid. We think that the only treatment is thyroid hormones. And then we get told that, to fix your problems, you just need to eat less and exercise more. Or
Mm.
we get told the problems are just there. Like that's just what happens when you get old. That's what happens when you are perimenopausal. That's what happens when you're menopausal. That's just what happens. So just kind of learn to live with it. And I think those are the biggest issues that really keep us stuck and searching for answers.
Just deal with it.
Yeah.
That's normal.
You're
Fine.
just aging. We're all aging. Ugh. No, not an excuse, not an excuse. Yeah, and so I think I would love to talk about testing because I think that's also a big thing. Like, oh no, my doctor checked my thyroid, said it was fine. And it seems like that's usually just they're looking at TSH. So maybe we can talk about like what else should we be asking our doctors to test? And then maybe we can even get into like the autoimmune side of things and what to test. Like, do we ask for antibodies? Do we ask for ANA? What's the list? What do we need to know for that?
Yeah. So essentially, there are truly 12 different thyroid markers that make up a complete thyroid panel. Now, we don't necessarily, if we're dealing with all the symptoms of low thyroid, maybe we've been diagnosed with low thyroid, you don't need to do like the antibodies to Graves because that would be more like hyperthyroid. So you don't need to do all 12 of the different markers. But I think what is really important is that, first of all, we have to be asking the question if you do have low thyroid, like if you have gone and they did check your TSH and your TSH was high and they gave you thyroid medication, you want to ask the question, well, why do I have low thyroid? And you alluded to this, and it's 90 to 98% of us that have been diagnosed with low thyroid actually have an underlying autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's. And it's really important to understand, do you have an autoimmune condition or not? And so those two antibodies would be the TPO antibody, that stands for thyroid peroxidase antibody. And then you also need the thyroglobulin antibody. Now, a lot of practitioners check one or the other, and you have to check both because you can have one or the other high, and it's still the same diagnosis of Hashimoto's. And what that means is that your immune system is making antibodies to tag your thyroid tissue for destruction. So essentially, your immune system is attacking the thyroid. Now, most of the time, traditional medicine doesn't check for these antibodies because it doesn't change treatment. So in that model, like it doesn't matter if you have Hashimoto's or you just have low thyroid, they're still going to give you thyroid medication, and that's going to be kind of the end of the treatment. That is the standard of care. So a lot of us get frustrated because we go into the doctor and they're just looking at TSH, but that's because when they look in the toolbox, all they have is thyroid hormones. So they're really just trying to check for the thing that they have the solution for, not really anything else. And so it's really important that you know if you have Hashimoto's, because when you have one autoimmune disease, it will lead to other autoimmune diseases. And with Hashimoto's in particular, you're at a greater risk of developing thyroid cancer. So getting your immune system under control is extremely important. But we can go into Hashimoto's later, but I'll get back to your question. So TSH is important, but looking at those thyroid antibodies, the TPO antibody and the thyroglobulin antibody is really important. That will tell you if you have Hashimoto's. Now, there is about a 20% false negative rate when we do these labs. So even if your antibodies are negative, it doesn't for sure rule out that you have Hashimoto's. And what I'm teaching my patients and the way that I practice is if somebody has low thyroid, I'm just assuming that they probably have Hashimoto's. And then you've got to get down to any of the underlying triggers that they might be expressing. But the other thing that's really important is to look at T4, and that would be total and free T4. You also want to look at T3, total T3 and free T3, because that tells us if you have an underconversion issue, right? Because the thyroid mostly makes T4. The thyroid medication that we take typically is T4. Now, there's obviously T3, but you want to make sure that you're converting that T4 into T3, because T4 is really inactive and the body has to convert T4 into T3, and that's the active form of your thyroid hormones. And then you want to look at T3 uptake. You want to look at reverse T3. You want to look at thyroid binding globulin. You want to look at, there's several other ones, but those are the biggest ones that we need to understand to look at different patterns. You know, can your body cleave off that protein carrier so that these can actually bind? That's what we look at free and total thyroid hormones for. When you have really low reverse T3, it tells me maybe you probably have an estrogen or testosterone issue. So there's all kinds of ways that the thyroid can miss a dysfunction outside of just looking at that TSH. And I think we would mostly be surprised that almost all thyroid metabolism takes place outside of the thyroid. The thyroid's mostly just making T4, and all the other things happen outside of the thyroid. And it's very important to understand that.
It's so true.
Wow.
We blame the poor thyroid, but we're not asking why it's under attack. And so I love that we are expanding this puzzle so we can really understand all of these inputs. And I think it's just so interesting, this like sort of myopic lens that you mentioned, so similar to how doctors look at cholesterol. They don't test all the things, and then it's like, well, they just test for the thing they have the solution for. Not so helpful.
Well,
And
the other thing we have to think about too is our whole medical system is set up in systems, right? Like you go to the cardiologist and they're looking at your cardiovascular health. You go to the neurologist, they're looking at your nervous system. You go to the endocrinologist. So everybody's looking at these parts, but nobody is
separately
really evaluating like, how does everything work together? Because the body does not work in parts. And I think that that's because our medical system is set up that way. That's how people are trained to think, like my thyroid works independently, but it doesn't, the body doesn't work like that. And it's also important to understand that the TSH that we're all looking at isn't even made by the thyroid. So most people are like, I don't understand why, like if you have high TSH, that means you got a low thyroid function, but it's important to understand that the TSH comes from the pituitary. And sometimes we have a miscommunication from the pituitary to the thyroid. Like I just saw one today. She had a super low TSH, but she had also a low T4. and those don't usually go together, right? So
Hmm.
her pituitary just wasn't communicating with the thyroid to tell the thyroid to actually make T4 hormone. So she didn't
Mhm.
need necessarily more thyroid medication. She needed to support the pituitary.
Ooh.
So important to know those nuances. Otherwise, we miss the mark and we give the wrong solution.
That's right.
And yeah, we are a system of systems, and our dad's a biological dentist, so he knows this so well. Like the mouth is connected to the body; it's not
Yeah.
separate. It's just like kind of
Yeah.
crazy. And what I see doctors missing a lot is the nutritional component. So when you test for this immune issue, which is you said very prevalent with Hashimoto's, like a low hanging fruit would be just optimizing nutrition. But I've seen doctors, they see antibodies and they say there's nothing you can do about it. So then we're not looking at inflammatory components like gluten, dairy, or maybe missing nutrients, selenium, iodine. And again, as you said, it's like we only have one solution. So how do
Yeah.
we zoom out and maybe just start with nutrition, because that's like a daily input that we're always making decisions about that could affect this
Yeah.
expression.
I would tell everyone listening, if they have a weight issue, they have a blood sugar problem. And so you cannot fix your health if you don't fix your blood sugar. You can't fix your blood sugar without optimizing the diet. Now, the optimizing blood sugar, you can't necessarily do it with diet alone because you have other things that impact your blood sugar, like underlying infections, like muscle mass, activity, exercise. Those things also impact your blood sugar, but you can't change and optimize blood sugar without fixing your diet and your nutrition. So, like you said, getting rid of gluten and dairy, those are huge. Why? Because they are highly inflammatory. And the research is showing that if you have Hashimoto's, then you're going to have a gluten sensitivity. No matter what. It doesn't matter what the tests say, you're going to have a gluten sensitivity. And when you eat gluten, those antibodies stay circulating in your system for 90 days or longer. So I did not know that when I first started on this journey like 20 years ago. And I would be gluten free like 6 days a week. And then I would cheat a little bit. I go to Starbucks and get a scone or something like that, not knowing of what was actually going on in the body. So I was never actually really gluten free in the beginning. I felt better, but I wasn't like as good as I could be. And then when I realized that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I've been doing that. So,
Yeah.
you have to be gluten free. And then as more and more research came out, now we can test for cross reactivity. And dairy is a cross reactor to gluten, meaning like when you eat dairy, it can act exactly like you're just eating gluten. And a lot of the gluten free grains are like that. A lot of things that we wouldn't suspect have a cross reactivity to gluten. And so you have to really know how the body's responding. You have to look for these underlying triggers, but managing your blood sugar is probably the most important. And so if you were managing your blood sugar, you wouldn't really eat anything with gluten in it anyway, because the grains that contain gluten, when you eat them, they will spike your blood sugar. So if we're just really focusing on how do we manage our blood sugar and our insulin, we would really focus on eating animal protein, veggies, a little bit of fruit, and really good healthy fat. And you can dig in and we can go down the rabbit hole of veggies. And is it high lectins? Should we stay away from lectins and nightshades and oxalates? So
Yeah.
you can fine tune, but for most people that becomes super overwhelming. So if you just focused on
Yeah.
protein, veggies, a little fruit, some good healthy fats, that's a really good start. And then we can look at labs and make sure we have adequate levels of vitamin D and adequate levels of B vitamins and all of those other things, because nutrition is huge. That's how the body functions. You can't constantly be putting in toxic, highly processed foods and expect the body to run well, right? It's like putting in terrible oil that your car can't run off of and expecting it to perform like a Porsche or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right. So with gluten, and I've heard this before, like 99% gluten free is like no, you're wasting your time kind of thing. You have to be 100%. Would you say the same thing for dairy because of the cross reactivity? You have to be 100% dairy free as well?
Yeah, and I would say if you have a cross reactivity to dairy, then you have to be 100%. Now, not everybody has that cross reactivity. And so some
Okay.
people can tolerate some types of dairy with less casein. So, like casein is a big protein molecule that adults can't digest. So when we drink breast milk when we're babies, we have certain enzymes in our gut up until the age of about 5 that allows us to break down and utilize that casein molecule. But it's important to understand that cow's milk has 32 times more casein than human breast milk. So the body, a human body, is not really set up to digest cow's milk even when we're young. And so, like if we look at goat's milk, it's about 16 times higher than human breast milk, and sheep's milk is about the same as human breast milk. So I would say, like if I'm going to cheat with dairy every now and then, I would eat more like a manchego cheese versus eating a cow cheese or even a goat cheese. And I don't really seem to have that big of an issue with it because it has lower casein. But the casein alone, no matter what level it's at, as an adult human being, we don't break that down well, and it is going to cause inflammation. Now, if you are really inflamed and you have loads of symptoms, your tolerance for how much you can put in or add in is going to be different than someone who has all of their labs optimized, inflammatory markers super low, zero symptoms. And if that person eats a little bit of manchego cheese, it's not going to have the same impact as this person over here who's highly inflamed and they're just not functioning well. So you have to kind of look at it that way. And I know there's you can literally find a study for any opinion you want to have on dairy one way or the other. But that has kind of been what I have known for over the last almost 30 years when I started to get into researching this. And I think it's really stood the test of time. And there's fads that pop up here and there, but I've treated, thousands of patients and I've helped other doctors. So I think I've probably worked on 10,000 cases, and clearing out the dairy is huge. And then once a person is in a place where they are optimized, if they can tolerate it and there's not a cross reactivity, little bits in here and there aren't going to throw the body out. But no, it's going to cause a little inflammation.
Yeah. So even
Okay.
something like an A2 milk that just has the A2 beta casein, if you're sensitive and your bucket is burdened, that's still going to be a problem. That tends to be kind of a fad, the raw milk, the A2. It's like, no, these things still have those components regardless.
So funny story. I have 3 A2 cows. I live on a ranch.
Cool.
And so I bought those cows because it's easier to feed baby pigs cow's milk instead of a bunch of grain feed, and it helps them grow really quickly. And I also like to have some of that milk on hand for any babies that might need to be bottle fed or whatever. But honestly, the A2, is it better? Maybe. But does it still cause inflammation because it still has the casein in it that we still can't digest after we're 5? Think about this. The purpose of dairy. The purpose is to grow a baby cow or a baby whatever, right? From a small infant to get it to where it can survive on its own, right? In a short amount of time. It has high insulin growth-like factors. It's got loads of fat in it. Not that fat is a bad thing, but the purpose of milk is to try to grow a baby infant into, like a toddler. I don't know. I'm not trying to grow my body like that. I'm trying to optimize. So we don't need that. That does not serve the purpose that we're trying to create here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, kind of like the antibiotics and hormones that they use. It's like we wouldn't put that in our body. Like, no.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Renee.
I didn't want to cut you off.
Well, I'm just already thinking of other sources. I want to go through upstream stressors. Renee, if this is too much of a right turn, tell me and we'll come back.
No, we're probably on the same track with that. Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of stressors, we know there's a lot in the environment, but with Hashimoto's being predominantly in women, and it's primarily an immune issue, not a thyroid issue, actual stress, like mental, emotional stress, tends to be a big tipper. It tips the bucket over. How do
Mhm.
we address stress since we're talking about women primarily?
Yep. So we need to look at stress in a complete way. And we need to understand that there's internal stress and there's external stress. So your body can only handle so much stress. And so the things that are easy to handle is kind of like the things we got going on inside, like underlying infections, cleaning up our diet, like handling inflammation. Like that's helping on the stress level internally. But then we also have to think about what is going on externally that's causing stress. And some ladies, many ladies that I talk to, they're like, Dr. Heather, I don't have external stress. I'm like, okay. So somebody who is in this state of health, they have external stress. So the more I inquire, they're like, I'm retired, finances are fine, my marriage is good, I'm not stressed. I said, okay, let's ask your husband, what does she stress about? And he's like, oh my gosh, all she thinks about, she worries about her grandson and she worries about her daughter and she worries about, her health. Because a lot of people get overly obsessed about our health and we're always focused on every little thing that might be
Mhm.
going on. And so it's really important to understand that your thoughts cause your body to release stress hormones. So when you think about stress, when you're worried about what could happen, what if this happens, I'm trying to plan for the worst. If the worst happens, at least I've already prepared for it and I know how to react. The whole time we're trying to predict the future, we're literally creating stress hormones. The pituitary is releasing these peptides and it goes down to the adrenal glands and it's releasing all this cortisol. And I will tell you, the ladies that have the most stress are the ladies who really have difficulty with weight loss and balancing their blood sugar. And like if someone is really stuck, I just do a deep dive on what are they thinking, how are they feeling, what is their stress load, and always it's the ladies who are working 50 to 60-hour weeks, the ladies that are constantly worried about something. And the crazy thing is that we get addicted to these stress hormones. And even if there's nothing in our life that's stressful, because it feels so weird to us, it feels so unfamiliar to be not stressed out, we literally start creating the stress so that we can produce these stress hormones to keep that cycle going. Now, we're not doing it consciously. We're not like,
Mhm.
oh, I feel weird because there's no
Yeah.
stress. I'm just going to stress. It's like the body internally is like, this feels, like it doesn't, this is normal to me. I feel like I am, not in a space where I'm familiar. So I'm going to create a familiar space again, because
Yeah.
that feels safe to the body. And so we have to really take a step back and look at, how are we feeling? How is our body functioning? What are the thoughts that we're thinking? Are we in a stress? Are we in a state of stress? Do you have anxiety and depression when there should not be when there's no external driver for that? So this is all just pushes us into health, because into ill health. I want you to think about the body is meant to handle stress in short periods of time. All right. Like if you think about a deer that is being chased by a coyote, it's like the deer, the adrenal glands release all this cortisol. You get shunt all of your blood to your external extremities. Your eyes get wide and dilate so that you can see. And so the deer runs from the coyote and it hides. And once the coyote's gone, the deer's like, okay, sweet, goes back to grazing, goes back to eating, everything returns back to normal, and it's good to go. And that's how the body is supposed to respond. But for us human beings, we get stuck in that fight or flight or that sympathetic overdrive. And we can't ever get the body back into parasympathetic because we're addicted to being over here. And when you do that, you can't rest, digest, or heal. And so that's when we're like, okay, I can't sleep and I can't lose weight and I have anxiety and I am constipated or I have diarrhea, I have IBS-C or IBS-D, and I got all these things. Is because your body is stuck in fight or flight and you have not gotten it into a place where it can rest, digest, and heal. And mostly that comes from the thoughts that we think and the emotions that we feel.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
What about caffeine? Because I wonder every time I see a Starbucks and there's like a line out the door, I'm just like, our country is addicted to coffee and caffeine. And I wonder, is that some of the addiction of that, the stress hormones? Like
Keeps the cycle
Yeah.
maybe if
going.
even if they don't have a stressful life, they drink caffeine and their body gets all the same signals like they're under
Right.
stress.
Yeah,
So I'm actually curious, do you recommend women stop drinking caffeine
I
or
do.
minimize it?
Yeah, especially like in the very beginning, we get off caffeine completely. I think it's
Okay.
important to understand this. A lot of people are like, so all the weight loss stuff out there, it all has caffeine in it, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's from
Ugh.
green tea, and oh, it's it's a good source of caffeine. But we have to understand that when we eat when we consume caffeine, it causes a cortisol response, which also is going to impact your blood sugar and your insulin. And cortisol and insulin are directly connected. The other thing that what happens to us is our blood sugar is so unstable that when we eat bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, cookies, cakes, candy, soda, our blood sugar is going to drop. Or if we don't eat often enough and we're fasting for too long, our blood sugar drops. We crave all of these things. This is your like 10 o'clock Starbucks line and your 3 or 4 o'clock Starbucks line. It's all of the ladies that have weak adrenals and bad blood sugar. When I drive by
For
there, I'm like,
sure.
oh,
Yeah.
maybe I should go hand them my card because
Yeah.
we
Exactly.
know that they are not functioning well. And people don't
Yeah.
realize you should literally have sustained energy all day and you should not feel different after you eat, right? So,
Mhm.
so many of us go into a place where we get, shaky, cranky, hangry in between meals and we feel better after we eat. That's not supposed to happen. Or
Right.
when we eat lunch, we feel like we are going to just fall asleep. And if we do not get some caffeine, we are not going to make it for the rest of the day. We get brain fog. So then we're reaching for all that stuff at Starbucks. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so
Fueling
detrimental.
Starbucks.
I'm
Yeah.
curious about beyond the caffeine, what other sort of lifestyle nutritional supports you advise? And I just want to give some context. I work with a lot of clients with autoimmune processes, and just one client this morning, she's been in a hypervigilant state for 12 years because she was with an alcoholic husband.
Mm.
And so she is so stuck in that fight or flight. Now that she's out of it, she sees the ocean, she watches the dolphins in the morning, but she's still kind of stuck over here. So beyond taking caffeine out, what are some other lifestyle supports to help kind of shift that gauge back so we can get into that healing mode?
Yeah. So, what I recommend is meditation. And meditation essentially it means just to get familiar with your thoughts. Okay. So, a lot of
Not
people are like,
stop them.
Yeah.
right. It's like, I'm not good at meditation. Well, nobody started out good at meditation because we're stuck in this, vicious looping thoughts all the time, never stopping. But it just means to slow them down and get to familiar with what is it actually that you're thinking and feeling. And eventually, when you get really good, you might be able to stop all the thoughts. But people that meditate, they don't have no thoughts. I mean, maybe monks might. I don't know. I haven't gotten there. And I've been meditating for a
Yeah.
long time. But it just means to get in a quiet space and to watch and notice your thoughts. And then to be able to be in that space, even during the day, like when you are feeling a weird energetic feeling, like anxious or not feeling great, to stop and think, what was I just thinking about? Where did that come from? And is that what I want to be thinking about? What would I rather be thinking? So it takes diligence and it takes us working through this, and it's a process. You've been thinking the same thoughts since you were probably 25 years old, and we think the same thoughts. You think about 90,000 thoughts a day, and about 90% of those are the same exact thoughts that you thought yesterday. And so starting to become
Wow.
aware of the thoughts that you're thinking and catching them and saying, oh, I don't want to think that way. This is how I want to change it. So it's a practice. A lot of women that I work with, and myself included, you know, when we are in this weight loss journey or we're on this health journey, it's like every time you see yourself in the mirror, I'm so fat. And then you're constantly, oh, I don't look good in this. I'm not comfortable in public. What are they thinking about me? Like all of these thoughts just keep going and going. And we become so unconscious to those thoughts, but it's really ruling our life and keeping us in this state of fight or flight. So it takes practice. First, you've got to figure out what are you thinking that is contributing to the state that you're in, and how do you want to think differently, and start to change and replace that. The other things that are really important is to get outside in nature. Go walk outside, not like a fast walk, like go outside and look at the foliage. This is what I like to do. Look at the flowers, look at the different plants that are blooming, have some gratitude for the perfection of the plants. Be with your animals, because animals also help get you into that more of that parasympathetic state. And getting sunshine. If you will get sunshine, especially first thing in the morning, like look towards the sun, it actually stimulates a production of serotonin. And the serotonin is like your happy hormone. And then serotonin turns into melatonin at night, which also sets your body up for healing and decreasing inflammation. And so it helps you sleep. So the more sun that you can get and be outside in nature, the easier it is to get more into that parasympathetic state.
Yeah,
Love that.
just nature alone. If people
Yeah.
incorporated that more, it would be a game changer. And this is really cool. I just saw an article this morning about something in Finland. I want to say it was called forest schools, I think is what they're
Mm.
calling it. Like,
For kids.
yeah, Lauren, I got to send you the article because I was like, if we ever have kids, we might move to Finland because this is
That
so
exists
cool.
here. I have a friend that sends their kids to it's a nature
Oh,
school. Like their
oh,
classroom is
okay.
predominantly outside. I
Oh,
think it's
okay. Yeah.
very rare, but it does exist.
That is
Yeah.
awesome. Can you imagine
Yeah.
though? Like we literally sit under these terrible lights, all day long. And there are days, even me, like, well, I set my day up so that I don't see patients before 10 so that I do get outside every
Ooh,
single morning.
nice.
But like after 10
Yeah.
till like 8 o'clock, there are some days where I am just sitting here, inside, not getting outside, unless I, have a little bit of a break, but not usually. But a lot of people spend their entire day all inside, and they leave work at dark. And and then we're in front of screens and all these blue lights. And so we wonder why our health is really suffering.
Hmm.
And then, I
Yeah.
usually wear like blue light blocking glasses. I really am usually very intentional about that because I sit in front of a screen literally all day long, probably like y'all.
Yeah.
All day long.
Yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
window
Yep.
to the outside, but it's
Yeah.
screen all day
I
long.
got a window. That's about
Yeah.
all I have.
Yeah. But I'm similar to you. I don't start my day till 9:30 so that I can make
Hmm.
sure I can get outside in the morning, get my
Yep.
sunshine. I know that is a privilege. Not everyone can do that, but it makes such a difference if you can. And then that
Yes.
midday getting outside.
Like
Yeah.
setting some boundaries, right? So we probably all own our own businesses, so it's easier to set our schedule. But honestly, I had to set a boundary, like because my schedule and my, staff will book it as much because they're trying to get as many patients in as possible. So you have to create those boundaries. Like, do not bother me before 10. For me to be 100% the rest of the day. But see, other people could block their boundaries around their lunchtime, right? They could say,
Mm.
I realize that there's a lot of work that has to be done, but I can't get to that work and be 100% if I don't take a break and get outside and move my body. So just creating those boundaries, and the earlier in the day you can get it, the better. Obviously,
Hmm.
because of the sunshine, but our energy
Yeah.
tends to be going down at night to prepare us for bed. And a lot of people are, I'm going to get outside and go work out at 6 o'clock in the evening when the body's not really set up to do that. I mean, some exercise is better than no exercise, but earlier in the day is certainly better.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a great tip. Great tip. I'm curious with other underlying stressors, something that I don't really work with a lot of patients with Hashimoto's anymore, but I used to. And something I saw a lot was a lot of them had gut
Mm-hmm.
dysfunction, poor
Mm-hmm.
digestion, gas, bloating, constipation. So maybe you can talk about what are you seeing there with patients? Is that a pretty common thing? Is that an underlying stressor impacting the
Yeah.
thyroid?
So there's a lot of people and studies that would show that autoimmunity starts in the gut, right? So, like, what happens is we eat foods that cause inflammation in the body. And the more inflammation, like gluten, dairy, soy, corn, those things cause inflammation in the gut, and that causes leaky gut. So, leaky gut is like when the junctions between the cells in the gut are super tight, and the body breaks down your food into single like amino acids, and it can get through the gut lining so that your body can use that to, rebuild and restore. But the more inflammation you have in the gut, it could be by food, it could be by infections, right? A lot of us have we have parasitic infections, we will have bacteria, yeast, fungal infections in the gut. That also creates inflammation, also creates leaky gut. So then you have these larger food molecules that get through the gut lining that shouldn't, and that triggers the autoimmune response. That's why, like, a lot of people, most people who have Hashimoto's have a sensitivity to gluten, because it's kind of like the body is recognizing it as that same tissue. And so usually autoimmunity starts in the gut. But see, if you're working with somebody who already has autoimmunity, you got to say, okay, we've got to restore gut function. We have to get the food sensitivities out, get underlying infections out. And you've got to start with that, not necessarily start with that, but you have to look at the priorities. You've got to work on gut health. You've got to work on blood sugar. You've got to clean up the diet. You have to reduce inflammation and make sure all of their nutritional deficiencies are handled. And then we go a bit further, and we really look for mold toxins, heavy metal toxins, and environmental toxins, because that's a trigger. That's an underlying stressor that also can impact your gut health. And I think a lot of people try to work on the gut like myopically, like we talked about. Even some functional medicine practitioners break the body into systems, and they say, okay, we got to heal the gut first. But if you don't heal the blood sugar, you're not going to heal the gut, because you've got, like, those things talk. You feed bacteria when you're eating a diet that's high in sugar and processed food, right? So you have to really look at the body as a whole, pick the top priorities, what are the biggest underlying triggers, and then retest. We talked about testing earlier. You got to retest to say, okay, how is the body healing? Have the top priorities changed and shifted? How do we recustomize care to continue us moving down this health journey?
Yeah, I'm a
Testing.
huge proponent of frequent testing. But unfortunately, a lot of clients, patients, depending on their provider, it's like they get that one annual test and they don't want to pay out of pocket. But
Yeah.
sometimes just rechecking those few key markers just to see if we're getting progress. But I love what you said about the gut being so myopic. And I see it with functional medicine providers all the time. Because if you don't fix the stress, you're not going to heal the leaky gut.
Yeah.
Food
Yeah.
allergies, or if you have heavy metal toxicity that's driving
Yeah.
fungal overgrowth in the gut, you're not going to get anywhere.
That's right. Yeah. So I see a lot of them saying, here, just do this gut cleanse. That's where you're going to start. I'm like, oh, they're not going to get anywhere. But
No.
that's fine. Everybody has their
Yeah.
own way of practicing,
Yeah.
but I usually see all those people, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
once they've
Yeah.
done all the things, it's like, okay, well, we haven't done all the things.
Yeah,
Right.
Yes.
exactly.
All the
So where do
things.
you start with biotoxin illness, such as a mold exposure, if they're in a current exposure or have had a past exposure? Do you do a urine mycotoxin panel? Do you also test environment? Do you look at foods that could be upregulating mold mycotoxins?
Yeah. So pretty much all of the above. So for me, kind of as a baseline, we get rid of most of the foods that have high molds, right? So we get rid of all the grains. We get rid of the dairy. We get rid of dried fruit. We get rid of a lot of those things that really where you would get the mold from in the first place dietarily. So that's kind of like a no-brainer. And then we do a total tox test from Vibrant America. So it's a urine test, and it tests mycotoxins, heavy metals, and environmental toxins kind of all in one. And so if I see someone who has a super high load of mycotoxins, we're like, all right, let's check your environment. Is there mold currently in your house? Is there mold at work? Like, is there some kind of current exposure that needs to be handled? Now, a lot of us, what we don't realize, and I do genetic testing for pretty much every patient to see if genetically can you clear out biotoxins. And most people with autoimmune issues or Hashimoto's, we have at least one or two haplotypes where genetically speaking, we don't clear mold out very well. So it doesn't mean we're living in it. It means that it's kind of accumulated over time. And it's important to understand that you're never going to avoid mold. Like it's in hospitals, hotels, in schools. It's if you don't travel or you just live in your own house or you're going to get exposed to it. So it's not like we have to have this fear of it, because a lot of people then move into a fear of ever getting it. But know that we have to keep the toxic load down, right? You're probably never going to 100% get rid of every single mold spore in your body, but we want to get it down so that it's not causing an autoimmune response or a trigger. And so it really doesn't help that much if they're living in it, because like we can clear it and then it's just a constant exposure, and we just don't see where people, I have a story. There was this lady, she's still a patient. She's been a patient for years, and she did amazing. And we took her through our mold protocol, and her levels came down, but they were still high, like still pretty significantly high. And she had somebody do an air sample test, and they're like, "You don't have any mold." I'm like, man, there's something there, because I know this protocol works. And if you have mold this high, you're getting it somewhere else. And so she hired this mold company that trained a dog to come find mold. And I had seen it on Instagram, and I thought it was a really cool thing. And, we talked to the company and all, and the dog came out to her house and found exactly where it was at. It was behind the dishwasher, and I think it was in a crawl space. And once she cleared that out and went back on the protocol, her numbers came down significantly. So sometimes, that air sample test is not going to catch it all. We oftentimes will do the duster test, where it tests for the DNA of different mycotoxins, because you can have these spore fragments. And so it's not going to be caught in an air test. And sometimes the specific gravity of very toxic molds, they don't stay in the air. They fall into the dust, specifically Stachybotrys. And so you're not going to catch it in the air sample test unless it's like really bad. So we'll do like a dust test from Envirobiomics, and they'll do a DNA culture of the different types of mold toxins and the levels there. So you're going to really be able to see the exposure level in the house. So it's pretty cool, but there's a lot to mold. It's a huge issue, and I think bigger than what anybody recommends. And then I didn't want to go into this when you're asking me about coffee, especially Starbucks, but all of this coffee has mold in it. So for me, I'm like, no way. I'll do something else if I need a cup of coffee.
Yeah, I drink Kion coffee. That's my go-to. Yeah,
and that's such an everyday thing, that constant low level exposure that clients could potentially be getting.
For sure. Yeah. So there are mold-free coffees that you can get. And so if you're going to drink coffee, you better make sure it's mold-free.
Yeah. Life Boost, Kion, Purity, those are some good
bulletproof.
ones.
Bulletproof.
But it's so interesting about the dog, because a common thing I hear with clients will be like, well, I don't smell anything, but you can't smell it. You can't smell it, but the dog can smell it.
I bet cats could probably really pick it up, because they have an amazing sense of smell, but they probably wouldn't tell you.
I'm not really a cat person, although I have a barn cat, but cats seem to be like on their own agenda all the time. So I don't think they're very good obedience.
No, they actually
a good meme, mold cat, but I'm not telling you.
I'm not telling you. Yeah, actually cats can smell, I think, like 1,000 times better than dogs or something. It's something like astronomical, but they can't train them. Like you can't train. It's very hard to train a cat. So
I love that. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Can you imagine like cats walking around the airport and stuff? Like they wouldn't do it.
Yeah. The cool thing about the dog, like whenever you test your house, you can just test it, but it doesn't tell you where it's at. So that's kind of like people are like, oh, well, I'll spend the money to do that, but then how do we know where it's at? They're not going to go down and tear down every single wall in their house. But I think it's the technology is getting better. So mold dogs are awesome, because they'll just go right to the source, and then you're not like tearing down walls. I used a guy who had some infrared lighting, and he could see where water damage might have been. So that was helpful as well. But I think that's one of the big hesitations, because once you find out you have it, like what now? And so it usually doesn't mean you have to completely, remodel and take everything down to the studs, but you got to figure out where it's at.
Yeah. That's why
Yeah.
we really like the got mold test kits, because you can at least silo it to like which room is it
Yeah,
coming from a little
sure.
bit better. Yeah.
Yeah,
But it is
Yeah.
sure.
so
But like the
tough.
dishwasher, like I wouldn't even think about that. And because like
Yep.
I live in the desert, and so I know I used to think like, oh, you're in the desert, like mold's not a problem.
Yep.
But actually it can be. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, dishwasher, that's probably a potential
Yeah.
one.
So behind the
Yeah.
dishwasher, behind the washing machine. And I think that's important because I treat patients in Colorado and Arizona. They're like, oh, we don't have a problem with mold. I'm like, no, actually, you do. There are some molds that really grow in low humidity, but also because of the temperatures, like in Arizona, all of the structures are so energy efficient.
Oh,
It kind of
I
blocks
hate
Oh,
this.
everything off. And then mold's like, okay, I can grow in here.
I know all
right.
of my like architect
Good point.
friends, they're like energy efficient. I'm like, no,
No.
It's like the
it has
sickest
to
building.
breathe. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Ugh, crazy.
I have a question about another stressor,
Hmm.
viral infections. And
Hmm.
maybe this is more general, but like I've been reading a lot lately about particularly Epstein-Barr virus because that was the start of my health journey. Now they're linking it to an increased risk for MS, lupus, certain types of cancer. I haven't really heard Hashimoto's, but maybe possibly.
Hmm.
So kind of a big question. What are your thoughts on viral load and autoimmune
No, I think it's
conditions?
huge. And before a lot of this research came out with Hashimoto's many decades ago, when I first started seeing Hashimoto's patients, I was just kind of doing a quick like, did you ever have mono? Yes. Did you have mono? Yes. I'm like, I had mono. Yes. And so I'm like, man, this is very, there's a high incidence of people who had mono or Epstein-Barr also have Hashimoto's. And I think as the research has moved forward, there's a lot of Cyrex testing has done where they have a like a pathogen panel where they will test different immune responses to some of these viruses. And one theory is that these viruses will hide in the tissue. That's why we actually have Hashimoto's, like Epstein-Barr will hide in the thyroid. So it will be trying to handle that underlying viral issue. And then a lot of RA, there's a different kind of virus or bacteria that hides in the joints, which is why the immune system is attacking the joints. Now, this I think is theory. It hasn't been proven. But think about this: underlying infections are a trigger, whether it's underlying bacterial infections, viral infections, parasitic infections, because it's triggering the immune system to be hyper responsive or attack a tissue. There could be some molecular mimicry, right? Where the molecule of these viruses or parasites or bacteria mimics another part of our own tissue as well. But for sure, one of the underlying triggers of all autoimmunity can be bacterial, viral, or parasitic. And so whenever I'm looking, there's ways that we can look at different patterns. And for clinical purposes, I haven't really found it necessary to isolate exactly what virus because the immune system really responds to all viruses the same, different than bacteria or parasites. And so the way that we approach that is I have several different viral protocols, but mostly it's to help support the immune system so the immune system can handle that virus like it's supposed to. But with autoimmunity, our immune systems don't respond like they should. And so it allows these underlying infections to hang out without us really noticing that we have an underlying infection. And so it's more chronic than acute.
Hmm.
Okay. That's really interesting. Very interesting. Okay.
It's so
It's
tough
it.
to not
I
tip
had
the immune system to
Yes,
continue to be
exactly.
overactive.
That's
Yeah.
right. I had a patient. She she had this episode. She was in her early 50s and we had everything really balanced. She's Hashimoto's, but she was doing well. She lost weight, really no symptoms. And one day she had stroke-like symptoms, like half of her face and her body kind of went numb and paralyzed, and she kind of passed out. So her husband took her to the ER. They ran all these tests and they said, we just think that you had a silent migraine. And she's like, what is a silent migraine? They're like, well, we think you had a migraine, but you didn't know it with no symptoms. I'm like, that makes zero sense whatsoever. I said, give me your labs from the hospital. So I get her labs from the hospital. and I just look at her CBC, and she has an acute viral infection. And so it's very easy to see on a CBC, like literally her lymphocytes were at 60 and they should be around 30. And it was high in the lab. And I'm like, at that moment, I was like, okay, I'm going to run the test to see which virus you're dealing with so that I just know for sure and you're not going to have another stroke. So, sure enough, Epstein-Barr reactivated, and it was more of an acute Epstein-Barr reaction. So, I was like, all right, you need to go on these viral protocols. And then we retested and it completely normalized. I'm like, how did they miss that? Like, how did they miss that this was an acute viral infection right on a CBC? Instead, they just called it a silent migraine and sent her home. And so, it's really important to know how to analyze these labs. And I think that's another frustration, is that people in traditional medicine, they are trained to diagnose and give a medication, right? Or a surgery, right? It's all about diagnosing disease and applying the appropriate medication or surgery, but they are not taught how to analyze underlying dysfunction, right? It's like disease, this goes with this medication. And if it's not that clear cut, or it doesn't have a medication or a treatment, it's really like they haven't been trained because there are no tools to handle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Right.
it's pretty sad. It's very, very sad. Yeah. Just real quickly, wanted to ask you how much prevalence you see with Hashimoto's and oral infections from extractions, root canals. You deal with a lot of that crossover?
Yes. You have to think about this. A lot of times I see like bacterial infections. And, when you see it on a CBC, you don't know where the bacterial infection is coming from. And so it usually is coming from a sinus infection, a dental infection, whether it's gums or teeth, or a gut infection. That's usually like the top 3 places where you can find out where these bacteria are. And so then we do a stool test, and sometimes we'll swab and do a nasal swab test. And then I'm always like, okay, when's the last time you went to the dentist? Are you guys working on what kind of what are y'all working on? They'll be like, oh, gingivitis. I'm like, oh, there we go. But, it's also important, like oral health is so important, but it's very much connected to your microbiome, right? And, sometimes I don't usually go down the rabbit hole so much of, do you have root canals and maybe you should get those out? Like, I don't have any because I know how detrimental those could be. And I would say if there was somebody that was really struggling with making progress, then that's where we would go. But it's also hard to find dentists. You said your dad was a biological dentist. It is really hard to find a dentist that knows anything about any of this that we're talking about. And so I think that patients get really frustrated on that avenue. Like, I found a natural holistic dentist and I'm like, can you do a cone CT scan? They're like, no, we don't know what that is. I'm like, okay.
Red flag.
I know. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go order it and I'll pay for somebody to read it. And then I'm going to come back and tell you what to do. And he's like, okay. But see, I'm a doctor and I was kind of talking doctory to him. And so I'm like, I need you to just take out this root canal. He's like, okay. So, most people they don't know to tell the dentist to do that, nor would a dentist be willing to do that. So I do think it's important that people do find a biological or holistic dentist to help with this, because some dentists still to this day take out their amalgam fillings or their mercury fillings without the appropriate ventilation, without the appropriate processes, and then they expose them to all this mercury more than they would be exposed to if it was left in their mouth. So, finding a holistic or biological dentist is so important.
Yeah. So a lot of conventional dentists will just say, just leave it in. It's better there. It's like, well, there's got to be another solution. It's taking it out safely and supporting detoxification. We could do that.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
And hopefully we'll see more and more dentists going into this realm.
Yeah.
That's the hope. Yes. And if not, you can always go to Maryland and see our dad. He does see patients from all over the country, which is pretty cool. But
that's awesome. You should give me his contact.
Where are you?
I'm in Texas, but we see patients all over. So we're in 8 states right now. And then we will be in about 14 states in the next couple of months.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Awesome. Texas has a lot of biological dentists. So
I don't know. If you know of any, let me know. I don't know in the Houston area. All I know is that the vets around here are very much conventional. All the
Oh,
veterinarians, like you're like, do you not know anything about any natural stuff? No. So I haven't dug
Yeah.
into I moved to Texas in 2021. So I haven't really made all of those networks or connections. But if you know of any, let me know. That would be
do
awesome.
because ironically, like 20% of my clients are in Texas. So I use two websites, IAOMT.org and IABDM.org. And you can zone in and find biological dentists under those
Okay.
certifications.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a good point about vets. We could talk about that for an hour. I've been like going down the rabbit hole on that. I mean, the vets are way behind even like human traditional medicine doctors. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah. I live on a ranch and I have cows and sheep and pig and a donkey and chickens and turkeys. I've got them all. And anytime one has an issue where I think, okay, I'm not sure why this pig is not walking, right? Like its back legs are completely not moving. Take it to the vet. They're like, oh, just put it down. I'm like, now I am not putting this thing down. So I am a
Oh gosh.
chiropractor by training. So I'm adjusting it. I'm giving it anti-inflammatory like foods and
Nice.
doing apple cider vinegar and all of these different herbs, and now it's like walking. I'm like,
Oh my
golly, it did not
gosh.
take that much. Cows, when we first got cows, they were coughing. And we asked, the people that know, they're like, oh, when they transfer from Colorado to Texas, they usually get this, cold because it's stressful and they're in a new environment. I'm like, okay, I get that. They're like, you just need to give it this shot. I'm like, oh, well, not going to do that. So what can I do? So
Yeah.
I made these smoothies. Now, granted, at the time I only had 3 cows, so it's easy to do that. I got apple cider vinegar and alfalfa and rosemary and thyme. And I just went through my garden and got all these herbs and I blended it up. In like 3 days, they're good to go. No, they have not had another cough since.
Wow.
And I'm like,
That's
okay.
amazing.
So
Mm.
deworming and all of that anti-parasitics, you can literally do just like you do with a human, and the animals are happy and healthy and loving life.
Hmm.
Oh, that's so cool.
Incredible.
That's so
Yeah.
Incredible.
cool. Oh,
We have
wow.
other options, lots of
Yes.
solutions, more tools in the toolbox. We got to think
Yes.
outside.
That's
Yes.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Heather, we want to wrap up with one final question for you. Can you give our audience one piece of advice, something they should start doing today to optimize their health?
Hmm.
And it doesn't have to be related to thyroid, it can be general, but wherever you want to go
Yeah.
with it.
I would try the most impactful thing someone could do is stop eating gluten. That's probably the most impactful. But then if we think about mindset too, start thinking about the thoughts that you're thinking over and over, and think about what you want to be thinking instead.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Thank
Yeah.
you. Can you tell our audience where they can find more of you, please?
Sure. I have a pretty large Facebook group. I think we're over 80,000 ladies now, and it's
Wow.
called Happy, Healthy, and Lean. So it is a really great group of ladies that are all supporting, because when you're on this health journey, you have to be surrounded by like-minded women. And there I do kind of like my own podcast. It's called Thyroid Thursday every single Thursday night, and I do master classes once a month. So you'll get loads of information and you'll be able to be surrounded by other women.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Thank
Okay.
you so much.
Well,
Thank
I'll
you
make
for all
sure
the
I
good work.
find that and link to that in the show notes so everyone can find you and learn
Yeah.
more.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you, Dr. Heather, for hanging out with us today and sharing all of your wisdom. So lucky to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It was fun. I think we could
Yeah.
talk forever.
I know we
Yes.
could.
I
Oh,
learned
we
so
could.
much and I have more questions. So
I know there's always
it's
more,
great.
but
It's
we're very
great.
happy for this time. And
Yes.
thanks to everyone who tuned in. We will see you next time.